pretty interesting budget 2-in-1 lens which is filming me right now, Meike 55mm f1.8 Pro lens. Let's review that. What's good guys, my name is Oleg Nikitin, you're watching No Limits on channel, and as you can tell this is f1.8 55mm on a full frame camera Sony ZV-E1. This is how the image looks, and I'm like, I don't know, 1.5 meters probably away from the wall. So now let's take a closer look at the lens. It's made out of plastic, but I have no complaints about the build quality. It's a full frame lens, as you can tell, and in the kit you'll find a plastic lens hood. It feels pretty cheap, but it does the job. On the body of the lens we have a clickable aperture ring, but it's not as stiff as I would like it to be, so be careful not to switch from auto to f16 accidentally. And we also have an AF/MF switch on the lens itself. Of course, the lens comes with the front and back caps, and also it has a 58mm filter thread, not the most common one, but still you can use an adapter ring as I did before. We also have a weather sealing on this lens with this pretty big red rubber ring, and we have a USB Type-C for firmware updates. And the weight of this lens is only 360 grams, which is not a lot, and I really like the size of this lens. So here it is on my Sony ZV-E10 Mark II. It's not the smallest lens in the world, but still it's not super big. So why did I mention this camera, Sony ZV-E10 Mark II, which is an APS-C camera, and why did I say about the 2-in-1 lens, talking about the Meike 55 f1.8? The thing is that if you use the 55mm focal length on the APS-C camera, you get around 85mm focal length and still a lot of background blur and separation, so you can use this lens as an 85mm on the APS-C camera and as a true regular lens 55mm on the full frame camera. So for example, if you start out with the APS-C, you can buy this lens to use it as a portrait lens for talking headshots, for example, and then when you switch to full frame, you'll be able to use this lens with both systems for a little bit different purposes, which is very nice. And speaking about the image quality of this lens, I took it for a walk. I used it with the Sony ZV-E1, which is a full frame camera, and as you can tell guys, 55mm looks very natural. We still get a lot of background blur and separation, even in tighter spaces, and all in all I really like the image quality. The lens is pretty sharp and has almost zero vignette at f2.8, great sharpness in the corners at f2.8 as well. We'll take a look at the charts and tests in a few seconds guys, but as you can tell at f1.8 we have a very nice blurry background as well. Also this lens almost does not have any distortion, and all in all I enjoyed this lens and the focal length and the sharpness of it, and to be honest the difference between 50mm and 55mm is not noticeable at all, and I love 50mm lenses. I did one of my best wedding videos on the 50mm GM lens from Sony. And one more pretty good benefit of this Pro Series lens by Meike is that it doesn't have any color shift, so it color matches with my Sony 20-70mm f4G lens, whereas the Meike 35mm f2 lens, which I'm using usually for my talking headshots, it has a very warm image, so I have to adjust the kelvins by about 300 to 400 kelvins, which is not really welcome, but this Pro lens doesn't suffer from this issue. Okay guys, now we have the image quality test, the distortion, vignette and sharpness. As you can tell we have a very slight barrel distortion, nothing crazy at all. At f1.8 we have pretty severe vignetting, but it's very gentle and soft fall off. And here we have the f2.2, which gets us very bright corners, and at f2.8 we almost get even illumination across the frame. By f4 almost nothing changes. In terms of sharpness, we have 300% scale in the center. I would like to say that f1.8 is doable, f2.2 and f2.8 are okay, and at f4 we get the most sharpness out of this lens. In terms of the corner sharpness, also 300% scale. We have the f1.8 with pretty severe vignetting, f2.2 is a bit brighter and sharper, f2.8 is okay, and at f4 we get the most amount of latitude and also sharpness in the corners. And here is the comparison with the 85mm f1.8 full frame lens on a full frame camera on the left and the Meike 55mm f1.8 lens on the crop sensor camera on the right. Of course we do get more background blur and separation out of the full frame camera and 85 f1.8, but still guys we have a pretty decent result of using the Meike 55mm as an 85mm on a crop sensor camera. So now let's test it on the APS-C camera, which is the Sony ZV-E10. We have almost zero distortion, as you can tell from this example. We have much less vignette on f2.2, and by the way the vignette is almost gone by f2.2 because on f2.8 we don't get any more latitude, f4 the same, and in the middle of the shot we still get great sharpness at f1.8, and by f4 we get the best sharpness of this lens. In the corners, we do have slightly softer corners, wide open, and they're pretty dark as well at f1.8, but by f2.2 and 2.8 we get pretty good sharpness and no vignette almost whatsoever. And here's the minimum focusing distance of this lens. We have a lot of background blur, it's used on the full frame camera by the way, and we have pretty nice bokeh balls as you can tell. Here's the minimum focusing distance at different apertures on the full frame camera. It's not the best minimum focusing distance, but it's okay for a 50mm lens. Almost all of those have pretty average minimum focusing distance. And here's what you can get on the crop sensor camera, Sony ZV-E10 Mark II. You get closer magnification ratio because of the crop sensor camera. And here's the comparison of the full frame and APS-C side by side with the same lens. And guys, in terms of autofocus performance, I did set it to the maximum speed and sensitivity on my Sony ZV-E1, which has an artificial intelligence focusing module as well. And as you can tell, we have very nice focus pulls. We have almost zero focus breathing, which is very impressive, by the way. And all in all, I do like the speed of the focus, the transitions, the bokeh, how the autofocus is handled. So all in all, zero complaints. You can sometimes hear the autofocus motor with the built-in microphone, but it's not too loud. So now let's take a look at the APS-C camera, Sony ZV-E10 Mark II, which has slower autofocus and worse autofocus overall. And guys, the speed and sensitivity is also set to maximum, and as you can tell, we have slight pulsing of the autofocus, so that is why I would suggest using a slower speed of the autofocus, like maybe 6, 5, or even 4 in terms of speed, and like 3 in terms of sensitivity, and it will give you much better results, but all in all, it does focus pretty flawlessly. Here we have the flares test, and you do get reduced flares at f2.8, and as you can tell guys, it's okay in terms of the flares performance, but at the extreme angle we get a pretty big light leak at f1.8. The weakest spot of this lens is of course chromatic aberrations, and you still get those even at f5.6. And to completely get rid of chromatic aberrations, you need to stop down to f8. So if chromatic aberrations is something crucial for you, probably this lens is not for you, but for me, it's completely workable and doable. I don't really care about them at all. One of the best parts for videographers about this lens is that it almost doesn't have focus breathing whatsoever. Especially if you use this lens wide open, you would not even notice the focus breathing, which is great, and I love this for video work. The bokeh quality is also pretty cool. We have 9-bladed aperture, and when we stop down we still retain circular shape at about f4, but then you can see the corners in the bokeh balls. And still guys, this bokeh performance is more than okay, at least for me. I've seen much worse. The bokeh quality itself is nice. We see no chromatic aberrations inside of those balls. We have some cat's eye shaping, kind of a swirly bokeh effect, which I prefer. A lot of Helios lenses do produce this effect, and I simply adore it. And in terms of chroma smearing, we have it until f3.2, so if you stop down to f3.2, you don't have those smeary artifacts in the light sources in the corner of your shot. And if you are into sunstars, we get pretty decent sunstars starting from f7.1, and until f16, they become really apparent and pronounced and pretty good looking as well. The pricing for this lens is kind of weird a little bit, because we have the Nikon version and we have the Sony version, and the Sony version is $50 more than the Nikon's version. I'm not sure why. The Nikon do have 50mm f1.8S version, which is very expensive, and Sony have 55mm f1.8 from Zeiss for $1,000, but you can find this lens used for about, I don't know, $300 to $400 to $500, but still, this lens is not better than the Meike lens, as far as I've seen from different reviewers. So no, I would rather pick the Meike lens 55 f1.8 instead of the Zeiss, because it has pretty soft image quality wide open and a lot of chromatic aberrations as well, and some issues with the bokeh, so I would rather pick the new Meike lens than the used Sony Zeiss lens. To conclude guys, I wasn't expecting much from this lens, but as you can tell, it has pretty decent performance aside from a couple of little issues which are okay for me, but they can be crucial for you, so choose wisely of course, and I've shown you both systems, the APS-C and the full frame, and I'm very satisfied with the results. I'll be using this lens together with my Sony ZV-E10 and with my Sony ZV-E1 on full frame and on APS-C. So if you have any further questions, please let me know down in the comment section below. And if you did enjoy this video, smash the like and subscribe buttons and hit the notifications bell. And right here I have a review of the Meike 55mm f2 lens, which is a bargain price, but with some caveats as well. See you there guys, take care, bye.